So, I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with a lot of people on this one, and apparently even with David Lynch himself, because I loved season 2 of Twin Peaks. Absolutely all of it. Even the parts everyone told me to brace for. Now, I'll get into the specifics as we go, but for now, hey everyone, I'm Nikanak, and I make videos about everything I question and overthink, and today, that is the remainder of season 2 of Twin Peaks. So without further ado, let's get into it. Before we get to the big stuff, I want to talk about the smaller storylines in this stretch of the season that get a surprisingly bad rap. Coming into these episodes blind, it feels like a lot of the campier moments are actually far more self-aware than people give them credit for. Where the creators, even though Frost and Lynch weren't part of the process, were just leaning into small-town absurdity, and when you look past the filler, they're actually playing with classic tropes, like for instance, the noir subversion. Instead of just letting James ride off into the sunset, the show forces him into an absurdly dramatic noir parody, with a cherry on top being a femme fatale. Was it necessary? No. Did I mind it? Not really, but James trapped in a noir story is genuinely hilarious, and it feels like the show was making fun of how dramatic his character always was before shipping him out of town.
Well, I'm only quiet on the outside.
I could almost hear what's inside from here.
The same goes for the mayor, Dougie, and Lana, because unpopular opinion, maybe, I don't know, not every thread needs to be about Bob. Even the ridiculous paternity rivalry between Dick Tremaine and Andy over little Nicky, whom Richard genuinely believes is the devil, hits, I think, that classic Twin Peaks balance where a goofy joke suddenly pivots into something heartbreaking once we learn about the kid's real backstory. And I get it, because arcs like Nadine's high school regression and super strength and her dating Mike, or Donna finding out that Ben Horn is her father, and while in Nadine's situation it feels bizarre, in Donna's it just feels rushed, but I never found myself wanting to skip any of it. Even the filler, in my opinion, has charm to it. And more importantly, I think this stretch allowed several side characters to really step up in this season. First and foremost, Pete. Beyond being good old Pete, who sees the good in pretty much everything, I had no idea he was a chess master, and that detail completely recontextualized him for me. Because most of the town, especially Catherine, completely dismisses him as just this sweet, slightly dorky guy who is caught in a miserable marriage. But then it turns out that he's actually a chess genius, and I think it's such a great addition to his character, and it pays off in a really satisfying way once Windom Earl enters the picture. Then we have Major Briggs. I said this in my previous video, and I still stand by this. I think he's a shepherd, someone who guides people where they need to go without always knowing why. He's a lot like Margaret for me. Neither will give you a direct answer, but they'll get you close enough. And he really comes through this season too, especially with Project Blue Book, the White Lodge, and his eventual escape from Windom Earl's captivity. Then we have Albert Rosenfield, who appeared here and there in season 2, but I loved watching his relationship with Harry evolve from total hostility into mutual respect. And finally, although she's always had this backbone and inner fortitude, Audrey's arc post-episode 9 is something I view with amazement. Because after Ben is released from jail, his mind breaks. It could be from the stress of almost being locked up, or maybe losing his businesses, or realizing that the murderer was right under his nose the whole time. But during all of this, Audrey really steps in. She does everything she can to nurse Ben back to health, while simultaneously working to save the family business. However, throughout the season, I kept wondering how she could still show any empathy toward her father after everything he's done. But she somehow does. As for the rest of the town's criminal element, Jean is shot by Cooper, Hank goes back to prison, and honestly good riddance, Josie dies in one of the strangest scenes of the entire series, and Andrew Packard turns out to be alive, so surprise, surprise there. Also, if anybody is wondering, Josie's cousin, at least that's how she introduced him to Harry, is also dead. Now, with all of that being said, let's get into the meat and potatoes, or should I say cherry pies and coffee. Okay, fine, I'll stop. But yes, let's move on. The looming threat of Windom Earl has been present throughout season 2. And honestly, I don't know about y'all, but I loved him as a villain. I thought he was both sinister and chaotic enough to keep me on the edge of my seat. And that episode when he finally arrives in Twin Peaks, oof, chef's kiss. When watching this, I couldn't help but think of True Detective Season 1. Through most of the season, Cooper assumes Earl's goal is purely personal, that he came back with a revenge plot to kill the people he loves. And in part, Cooper is right. That is definitely a factor, but the real reason Earl came to Twin Peaks is to enter the Black Lodge. So, I guess Earl's thinking was, why not kill two birds with one stone? Now, as the story progresses, we learn that Earl was actually working directly with Major Briggs on Project Blue Book, and Briggs tells Cooper around episode 20, I think, that Earl was dismissed because he became possessive of his work. Every assignment was kept entirely to himself. He became extremely secretive, and that's why he was fired. Now, going back to the autobiography of Special Agent Dale Cooper, we learn that Windom changed when he took his first life. And so my theory is that the first life Earl took was directly tied to his work on this project. Someone, I think, tried to interfere with his research, or maybe tried to take something from him, and this first act of violence sent him into a spiral he never came back from. And I did mention this in my video also on the autobiography, that Windom let something dark in during that period, but after watching the finale of season 2, I don't think it was Bob. I think there was a distinct mental break. Because when Earl talks to Leo about the White and Black Lodges, he describes the White Lodge as almost unbearable because everyone there is too good. But the Black Lodge, he speaks about it like it holds immense power, and that's what Windom Earl has always been chasing, in my opinion. Initially, I think it all started with discovery, finding something no one else had found. But somewhere along the way, discovery turned into an obsession with power. And unlike Leland, who let the darkness in without fully knowing what it would entail, I think Windom Earl desperately wanted to let the darkness in, and more importantly, he wanted to wield the power that came with it. One more thing about Earl that I do want to mention are those Scooby-Doo disguises and how well the concept was carried out.
Small town, man.
This scene genuinely unsettled me, and that horse costume will haunt me in my dreams.
A discouraging word.
Oh, one more thing. I do want to talk about his treatment of Leo Johnson. Now, as you all know, I've had some pretty strong negative opinions about Leo. But looking at his character's trajectory, starting from when Bobby and Shelley had their genius plan to take care of him while he was brain dead, and all the way to being lured in and enslaved by Windom, it's just grim. Let me preface this by saying Leo deserved jail time. Without a doubt. But this inhumane torture he endures under Earl was just awful to watch. And what makes it worse is that by the end, Leo reaches some level of awareness. He actually tries to help Major Briggs escape and wants to protect Shelley, and seeing a monstrous character get reduced to a tortured pet adds a much more disturbing layer to Windom's character and to the show in general. But now let's talk about the man Windom was really after. Now, somewhere around the middle part of the season, we start to piece together Windom's twisted plan. He intends to kill the queen, both in the chess game with Cooper/Pete and whoever wins the Miss Twin Peaks pageant. That turns out to be Annie Blackburn, Norma's sister, and someone Dale had fallen in love with. A quick side note on this relationship, this is one of my gripes with this season. It felt extremely rushed, as if Annie was written in quickly and we were supposed to feel the weight of their connection faster than the show had earned it. Now, I did do a little bit of digging into why it felt that way, and as it turns out, maybe for some of you this will be a surprise, I highly doubt it, but Cooper and Audrey were originally intended to be the endgame. But Kyle MacLachlan, who plays Dale, felt it wouldn't align with Cooper's ethics to date someone who had just or was about to graduate high school. So the writers had to bring in a new love interest fairly late in the game, and that was Annie. That also explains why Audrey's new love interest, John Justice Wheeler, felt also abrupt. And as much as I loved seeing Billy Zane, their romance to me felt like a placeholder because the show had been building toward Cooper and Audrey from the very beginning. Even though the age gap makes the change understandable, story-wise, you can feel the shift. That said, it didn't ruin my experience, but it was palpable. Also, I do wonder, and if this is tied to a spoiler, please don't spoil, but if it's not, then feel free to let me know your thoughts on this. Let's say if someone like Lena or Lana had won the pageant, and she would have been essentially abducted by Windom. Would Cooper have entered the Black Lodge then with perfect courage? Or was this always his destined path? Because Cooper's attachment to Annie, and I think his lingering grief for Caroline, is exactly what made him vulnerable when he entered the Black Lodge. And Hawk actually warns and explains this to Cooper at some point by saying,
Cooper, you may be fearless in this world, but there are other worlds. My people believe that the White Lodge
is a place where the spirits that rule man and nature here reside. There is also a legend of a place called the Black Lodge, the shadow self of the White Lodge. The legend says that every spirit must pass through there on the way to perfection. There, you will meet your own shadow self. My people call it the dweller on the threshold.
The dweller on the threshold.
But it is said, if you confront the Black Lodge with imperfect courage, it will utterly annihilate your soul.
And as I mentioned in my video on Cooper's autobiography, and I guess this is me answering my own question, but I would still love to hear your thoughts, this endless cycle of a woman being taken or killed while Cooper arrives just a second too late to save her is his ultimate tragic flaw. It's why I think this season ends the way it does. Which brings us to the actual Black Lodge. Now, I'm going to try my best to explain what I perceived, because to be completely honest, I am still not 100% sure what the hell that sequence was. So, on the surface, Cooper enters the Black Lodge. He fails his test due to the imperfect courage that Hawk warned him about and gets trapped while his possessed doppelganger walks out. But I do think that under all this surreal imagery, this whole sequence, at least to me, felt like a physical manifestation of Carl Jung's psychological concept of the shadow self. Jung's theory was that we all have a shadow, the hidden, darker, repressed parts of our psyche that we refuse to face. And I think in the Black Lodge, that concept becomes real, and it tests everyone who enters differently. Look at Windom Earl, for example. Earl didn't enter the lodge to confront himself or seek enlightenment. He thought he could step into this realm, control its forces, and weaponize its power. But the lodge completely destroys him because who the hell did Windom think he was? His hubris was thinking he was some evil genius who could control the lodge, when in reality he was just way in over his head. Cooper, on the other hand, faces his actual shadow, his doppelganger, and because his courage breaks when faced with fear and loss, the shadow wins. Then, this is where it gets a bit convoluted for myself, because we also have the presence of characters like Laura Palmer and Leland. And Laura being here raised so many questions for me, because when Leland was on his deathbed, he told Cooper that Bob wanted, or the evil wanted, Laura's soul, but never got it. And Leland's death was supposed to bring her to peace. So why is she still in the Black Lodge? Is she actually trapped, or is the lodge using her memory as another test for Cooper? Laura also tells Cooper that she'll see him in 25 years, and I'm assuming this is in regards to the return, but it's interesting because did Lynch and Frost actually know back then that they'd make the return? And why 25 years specifically? Why that number? With all of these questions, it does make me wonder if the Black Lodge isn't a physical afterlife, but a realm of the collective unconscious. Is everyone anchored to this place in some way? Whether they're dead, alive, redeemed, avenged? We know that Josie's death was tied to these supernatural forces, with Bob literally appearing right as her soul was being trapped in the wood of the Great Northern, yet she's nowhere to be found. Even the giant and the room service man, I thought they were good. And I still think they're on the side of light, but I can't tell you who or what they are in the context of the lodge. Also, who or what was waiting for Major Briggs? Was it this cloaked person? I need more answers. But I do know one thing, and that is that I know nothing. But all jokes aside, I do know that Bob didn't die with Leland, duh, we saw that in episode 9, and that he is currently inside Cooper's doppelganger while the real Cooper is in the Black Lodge, and that is genuinely terrifying. And as for my final thoughts and a few petty complaints, first off, I do feel like the finale leaves us with an overwhelming amount of cliffhangers. I don't know how long it will take for us to get answers, considering that Fire Walk With Me is a prequel focused on Laura. I highly doubt we're going to learn what happens to Audrey, Pete, Andrew, Ben, Donna, Nadine, Ed, Norma, or even Leo. And if those resolution points only exist in the return, it's going to be a very long wait for me. My second complaint is about how certain characters felt brushed aside. Now, I was completely satisfied with how they brought Laura's arc to a close. Whether episode 9 was when it should have happened or not is a whole other debate, but passing the torch allowed the series, although goofy and quirky and campy, to build a massive lore around itself. Between Cooper's history, the Lodge mythology, and all the Project Blue Book secrets, season 2, I think, took a huge narrative leap, and I loved watching the world get that much bigger. But Even though Laura's case was closed, I was pretty disappointed by how Sarah Palmer and Renette Pulaski basically disappeared after episode 10. Instead, I think it just feels a bit clumsy when Sarah randomly pops back up in the finale, and the same goes for Renette. She just randomly gets called into the sheriff's department, and then that's it. And where the hell did Mike/Philip Gerard go? Did he just vanish into thin air after everything went down? It just really sucks knowing the show got cancelled right on top of all of these massive cliffhangers. Friends, it is August 19th, 3:17 p.m. It's been almost 24 hours since I finished Twin Peaks Season 2. There comes a time in a man's life when he has to look at the facts and accept the truth. And the truth is, I just want more. Because even with all of the campy subplots, the supernatural, the slightest mention of UFOs, I didn't think for a single second that the plot was lost. Because through it all, as corny and cheesy as this will sound, it still felt like Twin Peaks. But what about you? How did you feel about Season 2? Now that we can finally talk about it, let me know all of your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you're still here, thank you so much for watching, not spoiling anything, and just being patient with me on this journey. And now remember, the important thing is to always keep questioning. Even me. Till next time, bye.